So ID is something fundamental to all of us. The way we think about ourselves, and from a practical sense, all our attributes, including our name, where we live, and other things that define us. Proving those characteristics to others is also extremely important and something we often need to do on a regular basis. Historically, those attributes have been held on a physical card or document and still are. It could be a driver's license, a bank card, a social security card, or a university certificate for your exam results. Whatever it is, the way you receive those things is generally the same. Some kind of central authority creates it and issues it to you with your name, maybe your address, and that central authority is well known and trusted. And usually that authority will store those attributes about you on their database. ID also includes all your online credentials to access your bank, your social media account, and all your other online services. So there are a few pain points about the way that ID works now in general. Cards and documents can be a pain to carry around, can be easily lost or damaged, and physical documents are often easy to fake. Despite the best efforts of card producers, there are a huge amount of fake IDs out there in one form or another. A report from a couple of years ago suggested that the DVLA, that's the Driver's License Agency of the UK, had discovered more than 3,000 fake driver's licenses over a 5-year period, and that's just the ones they knew about. We also need to trust and rely on companies to securely hold details of our credentials. There have, of course, been several high-profile cases in recent times where personal identifiable information, and that's usually shortened to PII, has been stolen through a hack. And other instances of companies passing or selling PII to third parties. Another big challenge in these times is that we are signing up to so many services online that we often need to go through the same process again and again to sign up to a service, submitting copies of a passport or a utility bill. And after that, we need to trust that service to safely store our personal details so we can log in and connect securely with them every time. On a wider scale, it's also estimated that there are around 1 billion people worldwide that do not hold any form of written or online documentation about themselves. And those people are almost excluded from the modern economy because of this. So from the point of view of a well-meaning organization, there are also pain points. They need to provide an expensive internal function to securely manage all this PII. Companies hold PII for several reasons, including for legal obligations, but often it is just for verification purposes to allow ongoing interaction. So the huge amount of PII that a large organization can hold is often known as their toxic data lake. Also, breaking GDPR rules around not securing personal data can lead to huge fines, and so ring-fencing all this stuff is a challenge. Also, in some cases, especially government agencies, they should provide third-party access to allow verifiers, and those verifiers are sometimes known as relying parties, someone that needs to verify that your claim is true. So they need to create some kind of API into a system to allow people to do that. So all this puts a large responsibility on the organization. So there are several initiatives going on now to find a way for us to use more digital versions of these credentials, to find a quick and secure way to prove they are valid, and to cut down on the amount of PII that companies themselves need to hold about us. One important concept that's emerged recently is so what does this mean? And this is one good definition that I recently read. SSI is the concept of individuals or organizations having sole ownership of their digital and analog identities and control over how their personal data is shared and used. This adds a layer of security and flexibility, allowing the identity holder to only reveal the necessary data for any given transaction or interaction. And since identity is such a central part of society, we need to ensure that user control will be the primary foundation that SSI will be built upon. Along with that general definition, there are a few principles drawn up that define the important value drivers for how any system of decentralized identity should work. And a few of those you can see listed here. So those include consent, access, transparency, and persistence, amongst others. So two main models are emerging, both using blockchain as an enabler for decentralizing people's credentials and identifiers. And just to note here, the term off-chain refers to data held away from the distributed ledger itself, and on-chain the opposite, with important data held in a verifiable way on the blockchain. So the off-chain, on-chain model that we see to the left here effectively means that digital credentials are held off-chain with the user, maybe on a phone wallet app, for example. And the on-chain data, again, still talking about the model to the left, is used to store verification info that lets people verify that the ID is authentic. And the model to the right is more the both credential and verification data are held on chain. So kind of more of an everything on chain approach. So I'm going to focus on an off-chain, on-chain model now, where identifiers and credentials are held with the subject themselves. And then in a few minutes, I'll hand over to Daria, who will talk about blockchain for background screening, where an everything on-chain approach might prove to be a better fit. So how does ID work right now? Let's take an example of a driver's license, something fairly common the world over. First off, Bob takes and hopefully passes a driving test. The driver's license agency, in the UK, this is the DVLA, issues a driver's license to Bob, which leads to two things. Firstly, they update Bob's records with his name, address, date of birth, and the type of vehicle Bob permitted to drive. And they also produce and send a physical card to him. So Bob needs to go on a business trip, and the car rental company needs to verify his license details. Now, there's a couple of ways Bob can verify the license with the company. First, he could show them the card in person, or maybe they accept a scanned email copy. Alternatively, he can log on to the license agency system and generate a code, which allows the company to access his driver's license record online for a set period of time, maybe 24 hours. With this, they can verify that his claim to be holding a full UK driver's license is true, and after the 24 hours, the code becomes invalid and no one will be able to access it until Bob provides another code. And this is something that I've needed to do a couple of times when renting a vehicle. Depending how much verification the company wants, they may ask for both. So the things required here for verification are both the physical card plus reliance and trust in the driver license agency to hold the various attributes of his PII, as well as online method for third parties to verify those details online. So how could this work in our new decentralized ID world? So I want to spend a couple of minutes now explaining this idea as it demonstrates the overall mechanics of this. So when Bob passes his driver's exam, instead of a physical card, the driver's agency would send him a digital driver's license that he can store on a phone app. Bob places an order for a car hire and receives a message to his wallet app, prompting him to submit details from the license. Excuse me. Okay, so yeah, he authorizes an app on his phone to submit the various attributes of his license being requested. This could include name, address, type of vehicle he's allowed to drive, that kind of thing. So the company receives those on an app, and using some crypto magic, they're able to prove that A, it was issued by the driver's license agency, and B, was issued to Bob specifically. They are then hopefully satisfied and rent Bob the car for a few days. So Bob had to share a few details to the rental company in this way, and they're able to verify all those claims without the use of a physical card, without the driver license agency system, and without any involvement of the license agency itself. So this is an important point. This completely disintermediates the license agency when verifying. So at this point, Bob has formed a trust relationship between him and the rental company. And once he forms that relationship, he can do business again without the need for rechecking his credentials. So his and the company's phone app form what's known as a pairwise relationship. And this also means that the company does not need to store Bob's personal data for the purpose of verification. Okay, but how does the company know that his digital license was genuine, and what crypto magic is going on here? First off, the agency some time ago published a digital identifier on-chain known as a DID document, which is this identifier here. So this document can be publicly searched up on the blockchain with a URI. It consists of a schema identifier, and that's the DID part here, a method, which is the SOV part, and a DID document address, which is this long number here. So this document address is unique to the agency, and it also contains the public part of a public-private key pair here. So the way this identifier has been designed, and this is being used in pilots now. It's been designed to follow a similar structure as a web URL address. So if you think of a web URL in a browser, it will usually start with a schema identifier, and that's the HTTP part, and that tells a browser to expect an HTML format or a hypertext format. So the equivalent here is the DID, which refers to a specific JSON schema for the identifier document. The method is like a location or a host name. So in a website URL for a web page, this would be the www part, kind of like a place to start looking for an address. In the DID identifier, this is the SOV. In this example, it means sovereign, referring to the sovereign blockchain network built on Hyperledger. So all this is held on chain in a distributed ledger. But I understand that the standard can also work with Ethereum, and in this case, the SOV part becomes ETH instead, telling any verifiers to look up the document address with an Ethereum smart contract. So this standard is fairly experimental, but it's quickly becoming a leading contender to be an open standard in the world of ID. And the W3C has a working group looking into this. Now, another thing to mention here, the private key part of the public-private key address pair remains hidden and is only known to the license agency. So when the agency issued the license to Bob, they kind of digitally signed it with that private key. But how does the company know that that digital signature was made by the license agency? Well, when Bob authorizes his app to share the license details, it also shares the digital signature of the license created by the agency, as well as the DID address of the agency. And then the company looks up the DID address, gets the public key, and with that can verify. But I guess what we need to ask here is, why does a distributed ledger a nice fit? Would it not be simpler just to store the public key here on the agency's website, for example? Well, firstly, you rely on the driver's license agency to always have this available online, and this becomes a point of centralization with all the other disadvantages that go along with this, such as data loss, hacks, downtime, reliance on DNS, maintenance effort for the agency, etc. Secondly, it assumes the location or URL of the document will never change. Okay, so in reality, this may not happen often, but when it does, no relying party will be able to get to the DID document. We can add to that the huge benefits of building an ecosystem which uses a common storage medium plus open standards that individuals and orgs can use. A distributed ledger therefore makes a nice universal lookup table and a fast, secure, and immutable way of storing and retrieving ID verification data. Also, as mentioned a moment ago, once the agency verifies Bob's credentials, their app and Bob's app forms a trust connection known as a pairwise relationship, and they can use this to initialize and communicate in the future. In this example, that might not happen that often because Bob might rent a car just, say, once a year. But for something like online banking, this pairwise relationship might be used on a daily basis. So as a first step, you would sign up with a bank, going through their KYC process using some verification methods similar to those described here. And then every time you want to log on to the bank's website, you only use phone wallet app to establish the secure connection, and maybe no username and no password at all. So another example here could be like a university certificate. Let's say I work hard and pass my exams. So the university issue me with a certificate that shows I completed the course and the qualification achieved. 2 months later, I apply for my dream job and the potential employer asks me for some evidence of my qualification. So right now, showing the certificate or maybe a copy is enough for the employer because of the potential effort involved in verifying my claims. But in the decentralized world that uses the identity off-chain model, when the university issues a certificate, they can provide me with a digital version that I store myself on the same phone wallet app used to store in my driver's license. So everything is with me. The university asks for various attributes from that certificate via a message. And then using my app, I submit the required details from the certificate. The university checks that it's valid by checking the digital signature. So the same way of verifying as the license we talked about a second ago. So I'm going to hand over to Daria now, who will talk about the use case of identification for background screening.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Daniel. So yes, I will talk a bit about background screening. What is background screening? So background screening is the process of verifying that you, as an employee, are eligible to work for a specific employer. This is something we all have gone through at some point because usually these checks are mandatory before hiring an individual. During the background screening check, the following is usually checked. For example, criminal records, drug records, education, identity and address verification, credit checks, and even social media. How is this different from that which Daniel was talking about? An individual in this case does not take part in the background screening check per se. An individual just applies for a job while their employer handles any type of background screening they typically do. Of course, an employer does not do this by themselves. This is not possible for them. Usually, they do not have access to multiple databases, public databases. All this data is stored in. An employer will have to contact a background screening company. Although there are small companies which work with individuals, but since this is not very financially beneficial, usually background screening is B2B type of a business. So an employer will submit their request to a background screening company they are associated with, and this background screening company in their turn will conduct these background screening checks. Documents Daniel mentioned, driver's license as well as a degree. Both are a part of almost any background check. Driver's license is not checked against any database individually. Usually this document is a part of the I-9 form checking process. The I-9 form is the only USA related document, probably the most important one an employee must complete before being hired. This document verifies a person is eligible to work in the USA. In this case, an individual provides their PII and either list A or list B documents while completing a form. Driver's license is one of the list B documents types. Once it is done, data provided in a form is being checked against two databases: DHS, Documents of Homeland Security Database, and SSA, Social Security Administration databases, either by a background screening company or with the help of the E-Verify, which is the electronic tool of doing basically the same, checking against the same databases, but only a bit faster. By the way, an employer is able to have access to the E-Verify directly. So in this case, in case of using the blockchain solution, we could have one single database allowing access for all parties involved: background screening companies, as well as public databases used for these background checks. The solution I'm talking about will not affect an individual personally, but it will help the main actors of these background screening processes. That's all from my side. Thank you. Daniel, you can proceed.
Thanks, Daria. Returning now to the idea of self-sovereign identity. So earlier I mentioned that one of the guiding principles of SSID is minimum disclosure. So in the real world, I might want to prove my age to buy alcohol, for example, and use my driver's license to do so. When I hand over my card with my photo, the shop attendant will see all my other details, as well including home address. But all they should really need to see is my date of birth. Actually, in most situations, the year of my birth would probably be enough. So in that situation, the shop attendant might have an app which sends a message to the customer standing in front of them, requesting just the customer's year of birth, for example. The customer also has an app which sees that request and takes just the verified year of birth from the digital driver's license, plus the license signature information that the shop's app can use to verify it. So the app that the customer sees that the year of birth was 1998, and that person can buy alcohol. So in this way, the shop has performed its due diligence, plus the customer did not need to disclose any other information about themselves at all. So with these methods being discussed, as we build more and more peer-to-peer connections, it should be possible to harness those in some way so that they can be used to verify future claims. For example, I might use a local council tax bill as a proof of address to help open an account with a well-known bank. Once I do that, the bank could publish an attestation on-chain that other people can use. So let's say after that, I want to open an online shopping account. They could consider the bank's attestation as, it's a strange word, but just means proof, effectively. They consider the bank's attestation as proof enough for verifying me. Maybe the bank performed a credit check and I had a high score. The online shopping site might consider me a low credit risk based on the bank's proof for loan and not go through the lengthy process of checking it themselves. So a system can emerge that kind of builds up a point score for us. And every time we go through a successful sign up and ID verify process, we can add to our point score that we can leverage later. So we're not the only things that need to be identified. You and me, it's clear that in the coming years, there's going to be thousands of internet-aware devices that will need to interconnect, including medical devices, traffic meters, in-car navigation systems, and home baby monitors. Many of these things are here with us today, and they're an essential ingredient for building the smart city concept of the future. In order to keep security, a full open trust layer will need to evolve, and decentralized ID could find the answer. The principles we already discussed could easily be used for internet-aware things, as well as people and companies. So regardless of the manufacturer, if a car needs to communicate with a traffic signal, for example, both devices would use a similar protocol, on open standards to establish trust. So an interaction could maybe go something like this. The car would first request that a traffic light that it approached go green if a junction is clear. The traffic signal would, the device itself would request an ID from the smart car, such as the type and who made it. Let's say the car claims to be a Hyundai. The traffic signal could hold a list of trusted DID addresses, and when the vehicle presents its ID proof, the traffic signal would see that Hyundai was one of its trusted entities and look up the valid public key on blockchain. It would use it to check that car's ID and then effectively switch to green, as long as the junction was clear, of course, and other checks made. So I think it will be interesting to see how this evolves. Several standards might be created and used, but maybe only one or two would reach some widespread adoption. One more important area, biometrics. So in line with the vision of ID 2020, this is the idea of significantly increasing the usage of biometric data, such as fingerprints, voice, and facial recognition. This will prove highly valuable to making ID trust even stronger. So we do, of course, already use some of these things like Touch ID on a smartphone, for example. But what we mean here is allowing the publishing of biometric attributes on chain and allowing people to connect that with all other ID attributes they collect during the whole of their lifetime, and then store that on the blockchain as a permanent record. As mentioned earlier, there are reportedly over 1 billion people worldwide without documented proof of their existence, and several million events of ID theft every year. So using biometric data as a foundation point will very likely benefit all of us. And even genetic signatures could be used. So all the stuff we talked about so far, what's going on right now in the real world? So you see a few companies and brands and logos here now. Well, Voronova is one of the companies leading the way in the self-sovereign ID field. It was set up in 2013 with a vision to fix the digital ID crisis, allow full control over an individual's identity, and add a trust layer to the internet. And it was at the forefront of driving the DID document open standard that I've been talking about. And in 2016, it invented the sovereign private blockchain network built on the Hyperledger platform, which I described as well. So that network now has close to 100 members acting as data stewards that form the network consortium. And you can see a handful of the consortium members there. Voronova also created a mobile app called Connect.me, which uses open standards to securely store and share digital credentials with a full key management system behind it. So I've downloaded this myself, and it has a great demo to understand the full process, and can highly recommend this if you're interested in learning more. A couple of other notable projects in this space. Zinc is a decentralized ID platform that focuses on reference checking. It allows candidates to upload their resume and then collect references from previous employers. Candidates can then share that information to employers who need to see it. The system allows you to sign up for free. Reference information, or more specifically, a signature of references, is stored on-chain with Ethereum. You can sign up with an email with the MetaMask Ethereum plugin, or using federated IDs such as Facebook or LinkedIn. Finally, API has a similar model to Zinc, with the main use case being recruitment. So API claims to supersede the recruitment broker role, basically the traditional recruitment middleman. Potential employees store their valuable credentials on-chain, keeping full control over what gets shared. And companies and orgs can use this as the single go-to source of information for their full-time and part-time hiring needs. So just to wrap up, there are several ways that blockchain can be used as an enabler technology for identity, from replacing our own system of ID cards to handling online logins, the background screening, and even trust between IoT devices. So personally, I see this as a big game changer in how ID is controlled, stored, and used in our day-to-day lives. Thank you for listening.